Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be, and whether you're watching live or archived. And welcome to episode number 89 of the Nautel Transmission Talk Tuesday webinar series. I'm your host, Jeff Welton, and joining me today, as always, so backstory, anybody who's watched these for a while knows that I make it a point to find somebody smarter than me. Anybody who's known me for a while knows that that's not a really big challenge. This week, we found Shane Toven speaking to us from an undisclosed location on a mountaintop somewhere in the East Coast. That's as far as we'll go. Shane wants to give it up more. Shane, welcome, and thanks for taking time out to
Jeff,
join us.
I don't know about that smarter than me comment. I think we're
like I
like
said, the bar is low. The bar is very low. William says in the background that he has his popcorn ready and expects to be entertained. So I'm not sure, this is not your regular morning show by any stretch.
We'll try to make it a good show for you.
That's probably a good reason for that. Now, the topic, and this is something that near and dear to my heart and something near and dear to Shane. So before we get into that, Shane, y'all get your Superman long johns on this week. You said something about, I saw Facebook said something about building like 5 transmitter sites or 5 sites or studios or radio stations in a week or some insane number, and you've got like 9 guys who are probably doing all the work while you sit in the truck talking to me.
The challenge, should we choose to accept it. 3 stations, 1 week. So we got the whole southeastern team here. Yeah, about 9 engineers. Many of them much smarter than me. And yes, they're doing all the work while I sit here in the truck talking to you guys.
There you go. I hope good to say. I see you got a sweater on. I hope it's a little warmer there than here. We're pushing 30s today, so winter's coming, folks.
Here it's about 57 degrees here, Fahrenheit.
Yeah. Positively tropical. See, now we keep talking about the weather and stuff. Folks will know exactly where you are once we get it nailed down that way. Do the mandatory housekeeping stuff first before we get too far into this. We do make these as interactive as possible. I see a lot of names on here I've seen before. I see a few names that we saw in Wisconsin last week. Phil, I'm looking at you, buddy. I didn't see you in Wisconsin last week. We'll leave the rest of it up to folks to interpret which Phil I mean. But so we do make them interactive. There is a question window where you can enter questions, comments, criticisms, sarcasm. We take it all. Shout out to Mark Voris, who gave us a good morning in the questions window. But yeah, type your question in there, hit the send, it'll pop up on our screens, and we'll drag it into the conversation where appropriate. Sometimes if not appropriate, all depends. By the same token, if you got a microphone and you're not shy, hit your little hand raise icon and it will allow us to unmute you. Then you can unmute yourself and we'll make you part of the conversation. Have a little fun. So the topic is transmitter sites. Now, you said building 3 stations. You're really taking established stations and doing upgrades to make them consistent with y'all's infrastructure, right?
Right. So one of the things that but what we do, I mean, in terms of how we do it, nationwide, is you have to have standardization, right? So we have our standard equipment racks, we have our satellite downlinks and all of that stuff. So yeah, thankfully the stations themselves are already on the air, but yeah, we're taking our standard complement of equipment and kind of standardizing the sites a little bit. So yes, a couple of them will actually be in HD as well. So that's why I'm here. I am apparently the HD system whisperer. So
the cool thing is after you've done 10 or 20 or 100 of them, it does get kind of automatic. The steps don't change much. I mean, and again, the great thing about having a standard, and I mean, I know a lot of folks that growl about one over the other because, well, opinions are like underwear. Everybody has some, I think. But, I mean, it's one of those situations where when you do have some sort of standard, whether you're putting in a brand N or a brand G or a brand E, the overall infrastructure doesn't change a lot. I mean, yeah, you're going to have port number assignments that have to vary and maybe different levels of config, but the overall stays pretty close to the same.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And we've done some so-called mixed marriages before, where like we've got brand N in the rack for our HD drive equipment, and then a brand G over on the transmitter side. And
shut up.
I'm sorry, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
True, true,
And
true.
and it works. It can work. It can work okay as long as you kind of take some of the considerations like timing into account.
Yeah, I see
That's
Jeff
probably one of the
Wilson's
trickier.
in the audience, so you know he's taking notes. There will be a quiz later. All
Yeah,
right.
I could teach a master course in HD system timing at this point, it seems.
Good deal. Good deal. That reminds me, I've got another question on that topic. I may hit you up about offline. So we got the advanced questions. I threw those up on the screen. There's, let's see, there's a couple that are quite relevant to this specific one. Bill had asked about ambient temperature control. And so, fun little side story. And we do those. But I'm walking through a local grocery store. When was it? Probably about a month and a half ago. I don't know, when I wasn't on the road. And I hear Jeff Welton, and I just like turn around. There's a guy I don't recognize, and he's like, so I'm a sales guy, right? You call my name, I automatically turn around, smile, stick out my hands, say, hey, how you doing? And the only difference between us and a politician, no, there's not a lot of difference anyway.
No comment.
Yeah. So he introduced himself, and it was Bill. He's an engineer for one of our local stations, one that I tend to listen to when I'm not listening to my own, but a fair bit. And he'd seen us on the TTTs, so, or seen me. So it's just a kind of cool note. But anyway, so he'd asked a question about temperature control, and that will be the topic for the next webinar 2 weeks from now. When we move further back. This one we're talking antenna system, RF side, and I added grounding just because I can't not talk about grounding. We'll talk about that next session too, probably a little bit. William had a good one about power monitoring solutions, so we'll hit that briefly. And damage to feed line, that's a good one from Andy, so we'll talk on that one. I meant to put in a picture. We had that exact problem at Cove FM a couple of weeks ago. From engineer Gina, the simulation for forecasting coverage area, that does exist on our website. That one, let's see. I'm scrolling up through the attendee list. Don't see that engineer on, but I'll handle that one through email. So yeah, we'll hit quite a bit of this. Good combination or thing about high humidity. So we'll hit that in the next one when we hit environmental as well. So very cool. This is what I figured we would talk about. And of course, as with all of our sessions, it will go everywhere, totally depending on where the ebb and the flow and the comments take us. But
Squirrel.
yeah, exactly. Hey, between Leo, Bunga, Henry, and Bonnie. So for those who don't know, those are collectively Shane and My's dogs. Squirrels are a welcome distraction. So I'm going to give a shout out. Dan Gunter is listening in from his studio, freshly designed studio in Opelika, Alabama. And Dan, I know you're sitting in the studio and I know your power's back on. This is a problem when you text me for this, so I just unmuted you. Now for the folks playing at home, I am going to add the caveat that drawing, that sketch, that ugly sketch to the right, that's mine, not Dan's. Okay, Dan is the handsome lad in the pictures to the left. And Dan, you are unmuted, so if you got a microphone, which I know you're scrambling to find right now, then feel free to unmute yourself. And what I wanted to talk about was documentation, because you can't fix a problem until you know what your problem is. And that's it. So Dan, tell us what you're doing. You're looking really intently at the laptop and the sheet of paper there.
Hi, Jeff. You hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. I still haven't tweaked everything on the audio set up here, so it might be a little strange sounding. No, that was an install. We commissioned a new NV 10LT and fired it up on October the 6th. And in case I have to go back later when I can't remember exactly how I've wired something, or someone has to go back behind me years from now, I don't want them having to re-engineer and disassemble everything that they don't figure out what's going on. So the diagram there I'm drawing is how the remote control wiring for the NV10LT is tied to our sign system through terminal blocks and everything else. So They can look at it, figure it out. That's laminated. It's in the binder. They don't have to do what I have to do so often. And I'm sure nobody else in this webinar has ever had to go in and figure out what the heck has somebody done.
No, never,
No,
never.
No.
Yeah, no.
that's right,
Especially
Shane.
not
I
with all
know.
the sites I see. No, never. Yeah.
But I'm kind of known for taking the time to diagram everything because, heck, a month from now, with all the sites that I deal with, I probably won't remember exactly how I wired it or what color wire went where. And so, I make it easy on myself and hopefully somebody down the road. Plus,
Oh,
I've also found out that a lot of times when you're doing that, you find yourself looking, if you're drawing it ahead of time, you go, wait a minute. You look over at the reference manual on the transmitter, you go, no, 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 that's not going to go to pin 9. That's going to go to pin 19. And you catch some things before you end up having to figure out why is this not working. So
yep.
that's
Yeah.
just
And William in the comments mentions it's so convenient to blame their predecessor. Don't know what they were thinking. And that's my line. It's a two-part thing. You walk into a site, and that's the picture on the right is I walked into a site and I was trying to figure out why they were having the failures they were having. So you've got 3 grounds not connected, and one ferrite with no surge protection other than that. And I'm the ferrite king, but if you don't have surge protection and proper grounding, the ferrite on its own isn't going to do anything.
Yep.
And I walked in and I took a look, and the first question is, what the heck is going on here? And the second question is, why the heck did they do it that way? So yeah, first you ask what, then you ask why.
Right. Yeah. And Jeff, I know you see this time and time again. You'll have customers who go, my modules are constantly blowing up. This transmitter's terrible. My transmitter keeps blowing up. What the heck's going on? And then you look really closely at how it's installed at their site, and you
Right.
find things like this. It's not so much that lightning hits the site. It's that, the potential difference between
Right.
things when lightning hits
Yep.
the site, what'll really get you. I mean, it doesn't matter if they all raise up to the potential of, whatever. As long as they're all doing that at the same time, everything's fine. But if you get any potential difference between things, guess what happens?
Yep.
Things go boom. Sorry, Jeff.
Yeah, no, quite literally. Hey, thanks for taking my tagline though. But yeah, and in this particular case, we're looking at a ballpark $45,000-$50,000 transmitter, depending on what day of the week it was and who sold it, and But he's dropped almost half the price of the transmitter and power modules over 10 years, and I think I can fix that pretty easily. So now the poor guy's waiting on me to get through the honey-do list far enough to get the trip report done, so he knows what he needs to do. But yeah, Brad mentions in the comments when we were talking about William's statement that it's easy to blame your predecessor. Brad's like, yeah, that works great until you are the predecessor.
Yeah, I know there are people who are going to come after me and go, what the heck was he thinking?
What was your logic? Yep. So the big thing that I wanted to get to here, and I want to thank Dan because I called him quite literally 15 minutes before we logged into the webinar and said, hey, do you mind if I use those pictures you put on Facebook? Because I like to have the proper attribution. So little side note, Dan's built himself a fully blown studio that he's going to be recording some instructional videos on. So keep an eye out for those, folks. So and Alabama Broadcast Services. There you go. There's your shout out, Dan. Checks in the. I hope my check's in the mail. Yeah. I almost sent that the wrong way.
One parting comment I want to ask you and Shane this. Raise your hand if you have ever hit the day instead of going, what the heck was so-and-so thinking? You walk back in and you go, what in the world was I thinking? And I'll hold it at that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.
I mean, so you're at a site, you either don't have the right stuff with you for some reason, you're tired, whatever, you've done something, you're at the end, where you're at the end of the day and you just want to get it done and you just want to get out of there. And then you come back, in the future and you go, what in the world? Why did they do that?
Sometimes it's a little more immediate when the red lights come on and you look at it and go, "Oop, shouldn't have done that."
Yep.
But yeah.
Or let the magical smoke out.
I see Brad and William are with us on that one.
Yeah, it happens a lot, no question. I mean, everything from, I'll send an email and get a response back, ask some more questions, and then I'll be looking at my original email and go, not what I meant to say. Matter of fact, that's totally wrong. I'm glad they asked questions. All right. So moving on, document first. First and foremost, document. Now, one of the other things that I do a lot when I walk into a site is I walk around with the phone and I take pictures. And like then I'll zoom in on them later. And like on this one, this is the same site, by the way, you'll notice something missing. Something that should be every 10 or 20 or 30 feet, depending on your installer up that coax. What's missing from this picture, Shane?
Let me look. Okay, grounding kits.
So we've got an antenna on a hill, not too far north of where you're sitting at the moment, and no grounding kits. And as I said, there's no ground on the coax till it gets to the transmitter.
So we have we have a standardized inspection checklist as well that we do. Every year we go through sites, and one of the items on that checklist is, in fact, grounding kits on the coax. Is there one at the very minimum? Is there one at the top at the antenna? Is there one in the middle of that coax run? And is there one in the base? And for good measure, there'll often be one at the building as well. So it makes a huge difference.
Switching gears, and never mind, I don't have it on this laptop where I can get to it easily.
Of course,
we have them.
That all assumes that your tower has a good ground to begin with.
Right. And I mean, we have them for customer service too. They've got checklists for AM sites, FM sites, and even HD installs.
And
so,
when you do those ground kits, make sure you actually do them right. There's a right way. There's a right way to do them, and there are a bunch of wrong ways to do them.
That's true. Almost everything.
Again, I've seen it all. I've seen somebody who would take a piece of like number 12 and literally just like electrical tape it to the lug from the grounding kit and go, good enough. Yeah, that's not going to do it.
Speaking of which.
Oh, yeah.
So let's see. This is a video. It may or may not work. I am almost certain the sound won't work. I hope the sound won't work, but we'll find out. So there you go. That's the transmitter ground is basically an AM ground radial, 6-gauge, 8-gauge soft drawn copper. And William mentions the spark gap with the ground wire from the other. So that ground wire from the other corner, we think was coming from the tower. Not sure, didn't track it because, well, as you can see, it's not connected at this point to anything except for the obvious lightning strike, and then that connection will get a little wider anyway. So yeah, but again, coming back to, and over on the right, we've got the AC panels have ground wires, and for an AC panel, that's not an unacceptable ground wire. And it goes out to the rod. So flipping back to my previous page, 2 pages. So our AC's in the northeast corner going to ground, our transmitter's in the northwest corner going to ground, and our tower is south of the building going to ground. But to the best of our knowledge, none of those grounds are connected. And that leads to difficulties. So there you go.
Right. And one of the problems you may run into, depending on your jurisdiction, some electrical inspectors may not quite understand what's going on there and why those all need to be bonded together. Some of them will fight you on bonding all of that to your service ground as well at the utility entrance. But it is important. It does matter. Again, it's about keeping all that potential, keeping the potential the same for all those things. Because otherwise, if you're not connected to your utility ground, guess what? You get a surge on that utility from lightning. That's going to elevate in potential, and your other stuff is all going to be at a different potential. And again, yes, Jeff, things go boom.
Right. And for anybody taking notes at home, it is worth noting that Article 250.4 of the National Electrical Code in the United States was changed around 2010 to insist that facility ground and electrical ground must be bonded together.
Yes.
Okay. And so that's critical. Now, I'm going to quantify that because not every state follows the same version of the NEC. Different states will follow different years as their reference guide. And beyond that, some states, looking at you, Mississippi, don't follow the NEC at all and rely on state and local electrical codes.
Yeah.
So it is very important to be conversant with your electrician and your inspector to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Right. And a lot of electricians don't understand the whole concept of a separate facility ground for RF and things like that versus your AC safety ground.
Right.
So.
Mark Forrest makes the comment, yikes, plastic over the top of the transmitter, that's scary. And this is a repurposed, I'll probably use this picture again next session when we're talking about the cooling and air handling as well. But this is another prime example of you walk into a site to do an inspection, and I think in this case, somebody who looks a lot like you was inspecting a totally different building and just happened to buy this one.
Well, because there was something that was causing issues with the stuff that I was there to look at, and I see this, suddenly I see a skirt on the tower. I'm like, that wasn't there before. And then I look over and I see this, and I'm like, that definitely wasn't there before. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So.
And Mark Boris mentions, yikes, plastic over the top. And it's Mark, this isn't too far away from you. But
yeah, in fact, Mark, you probably know exactly where this site is.
So, and now we're going to wait for the comment that, yeah, the plastic's still there, or no, that leak's been fixed.
I don't think any of that is still there, thankfully. So.
Let's see, is that metal building sitting on wood shims?
Yeah, I'm not even sure it's sitting on shims.
I see a couple of concrete, glorified paving
I think
stones.
it's very poorly sitting on what was an old concrete slab that's deteriorated and sunk a little bit. So
just again, one of those things that this site, and cool, because you sent me the one picture and it was just a glorified mess of things to zoom in on. It was so totally awesome.
I had to, this by far takes the cake in terms of, some of the worst stuff that I've seen. So.
Well, and it's like everything else too. And I mean, in fairness, Brad likes the fan. Well, that was the cooling for the building. So, you do what you can do. I like the fan mounting arrangement more than anything. It's like, yeah, reduce, reuse, recycle. But yeah, cover off the electrical panel was one note. Now that one could have been a lot worse because although the cover's off the overall panel, at least the actual switch box cover is still there.
Yeah, at least the terminals are covered. Yeah,
which puts it above several I've run into. See,
absolutely.
Going back, yeah, no, same panel. All right, but yeah, again, sometimes things have a way of getting away when you're in a hurry to just get stuff done and get it on the air. And
I didn't even notice the caps in that panel, Brad.
The lower right corner.
I have no idea what that's all about. I didn't even notice.
Push start for the doorbell. So this is an example of the kind of thing that we do run into a lot more than we'd like to admit. But again, when it's your site and you're kind of in a hurry to get this done and you're one guy handling 20 stations and you need to get it on the air right now, sometimes making it look pretty takes second fiddle, and that can get away from you fast.
Well, there's making it look pretty and there's safe.
Yeah.
At least make it safe. It doesn't necessarily have to look good, but at least make it safe.
Right. Although I did like Bill's timely comment about the Barbie Dreamhouse cooling ventilation system.
So Brad points out at least those caps appear to be shorted. Well, maybe.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't even notice that. I totally did not notice that.
Well, and I'm not even guaranteeing it's a cap. From the terminals, it almost looks like a 111E repeat coil. Maybe it's maybe they're decoupling audio through it. Who knows?
At that site, who knows?
Yeah. So, and that's the whole point. When you walk into something like this, as the stranger from first on, as we said earlier, first question is, what the heck's going on? Yeah. The second question is, why the heck is this what's going on? And then the third question is, how do I document it and make it right? And Brad says maybe they're trying to get 60 hertz out.
Yeah, Curtis points out our ownership just wants it on and doesn't want to spend the money, and that does happen. It's unfortunate, but sometimes that is the case.
Yeah, let's see. Keith, let's see. When I installed a VS2.5 some years back, passed on the manual to the transmitter. The electrical contractor didn't understand what an RF ground was. Transmitter located in an upper floor. Must I run a strep from the transmitter all the way down to an earth grounding point? So that's not a bad question, Keith. And the answer
Question.
is it depends. If, for example, you were in Willis Tower, which will always be Sears Tower, sorry, Chicago folks, or Empire or IDS or any of the big buildings, typically the frame of the building is the reference ground. Others will have dedicated grounds run to each transmitter room with a bulkhead panel to connect to. If you're on, say, the upper floor of a two-story building, then in that case, you probably should have a dedicated ground run from earth to the room. And downstairs where the electrical entrance comes into the building, that should be tied to the electrical entrance ground.
Right.
Now, I'm going to qualify that because I also realize that this is the real world, and especially in a leased site, you may not have access to that stuff. So you do have to take it, situationally. I use the word situational way more than I should. But I don't think it's wrong. Sahil wants to know if this transmitter's still up and running, and I think the
Up
short
and running
answer
is a
is
relative term. I think that poor XR had more alarm lights on it that I could even shake a stick at.
yeah. And at that point, I don't look at that as a judgment on my transmitter product at all.
No,
It's
no.
like I say, the one that was blowing up from the previous picture. It's like you can only do so much.
I think the phrase I uttered when I opened that door is, "What did that poor XR ever do to deserve this?"
Mm-hmm. Now, I did have a really cool one once where somebody called me to complain about an AM that was blowing up stuff. And this goes back 20 years. And they were growling about it and growling. This transmitter's blowing up and blowing up and blowing up. And it's like, what did you have before that? BC5H. Okay, so why did you replace it? Well, because we blew the tube out 4 times in a year. And so if you're blowing up a tube transmitter and you put in a solid state transmitter, I can guarantee you if you go
Time.
fix some other stuff,
Yeah.
there's going to be situations. So yeah, definitely situations. Speaking of grounding, this picture, I'm going to retire this one soon, but this is my house. And this is me discovering that, compression connections used at my house. And it was loose enough that when I dug it up, I could move it all around by hand. So it's brazed now. Things have improved. Again, other thing, when you find something, fix it.
Yep.
So number one thing, you get called to a site. What's your process, Shane? I mean, if I get called to a site and there's an off-air situation, how do you approach it? Do you just walk straight in and start looking for red lights, or do you start?
Yeah, I mean, you start by using your senses, including, and most people don't think of this, your sense of smell. I mean, does it smell like something's blown up? Okay, if
Yeah.
it does, where? And yeah, look for alarm lights. Is there something obvious there? If you do see an alarm light, is it really that piece of equipment, or is it something upstream from it, perhaps, or even downstream? Follow the chain and see where the signal stops. This is basic troubleshooting 101 type stuff. So, and yeah,
as an example, and this is again Cove FM, and that's not a fuzzy picture. That's an inch of ice on the left side of all
got a
the
great
footage.
example there of, yeah, and even looking at environmental conditions. Okay, I got high reflected power. Oh, well, could it be this 1 inch of radial ice on my antenna without radomes? Maybe.
Yeah, right. Or if you got 2 inches of ice over the radomes, that's not going. Why is my coverage gone to pieces?
When they start looking like beach balls instead of rototillers,
Right.
big white soccer balls. Yeah.
And that kind of ties into, I think Brad had asked in the advanced questions about cable wear, and I had posted a picture on either one of my slide decks or on Facebook or both about not this one so much, but related. At one of our sites, at our site actually, we had a reflected power issue to the point that the transmitters just said, no, I'm not doing it. We ended up bringing in a tower climber, and they found that under one of the round member adapters, the cable clamps on the 7/8 going up the tower. And fortunately, it was close to the antenna, which was beneficial. But there'd been enough wind and enough cable motion that the cable had totally worn through both the jacket and a good portion of the outer connector. So the shield. So it was wearing through the phenolic inner when we found it. And yeah, every time it got a little moist, impedance changed significantly. Transmitter said, nope, not doing it. So that one required a tower climber. The thing to remember, and Shane will talk about that after this slide, but the thing to remember is that in almost every broadcast transmitter out there of current technology, and again, I'm not specifying one brand over another, almost all of them have a power probe at the output. And that power probe is the last thing in the transmitter. The only way you can show a reflected power as a result of something in the transmitter is that the transmitter's off frequency for the tuned circuit it's running into.
Right.
If it's on frequency and you can hear it on 98.1 and you're supposed to be on 98.1, it's SWR is almost never in the transmitter. Now, I'm not saying a power probe can't fail. They can, but it is really, really rare.
Yeah, chances are good if you're seeing VSWR, the problem is almost certainly downstream of the transmitter. I don't think I can point to one example where I've seen a VSWR trip and it was actually the transmitter's fault. Although I think you and I are going to talk about a fun story about that next, aren't we?
Speaking of that, I just happened to grab an excerpt from an email that was in my inbox. So I don't remember who wrote this email exactly.
I believe that was me.
But I'm going to say, I think he's on the screen. So this is a good example. I mean, because you chased this for,
my goodness.
I mean, 2-3 engineers, frankly, 2 of our support guys, and several months.
Quite frankly, we're still chasing it. This was a really elusive one. And still is an elusive one. So one thing about the Nautel transmitters is that they will protect themselves, in as many conditions as possible, whether it be folding back or in this case, actually shutting down briefly. So what was happening at this particular site is NV20 LTN.
30, wasn't it?
Yeah, 30. Yeah, right. NV30 LTN. And so what was happening was sighted beyond the air, everything's happy, VSWR looks great, all the readings look great, and then suddenly just static. You'd get, for a brief moment. And it was not long. It was, we're talking like seconds or less here. So we'd look in the log of the transmitter and it would say, VSWR shutback, VSWR shutback. I'm like, I don't think I've ever seen that error before. What in the world is going on here? Well, the vendor for this is a combined site. So the vendor for the combiner and antenna, the other station on this combiner was not having problems, by the way. So that kind of was, was leading us toward, okay, is this our transmitter that's having this problem? Because yeah, their VSWR looked great too, and ours did. We were just getting these mysterious VSWR shutback errors. So we went through and did all the troubleshooting at the transmitter. It finally got to the point where I was literally looking at what the power probe in the transmitter was seeing and what it was sending the transmitter. And sure enough, I caught in the act a very brief event that would cause the transmitter to fold back or to shut down, basically to quench an arc. So the transmitter was seeing, hey, something on this line is arcing, I better quench it. And it did. Repeatedly, and the interval on this was really strange. It could be, it could do it repeatedly. It seemed to do it when the system was warmed up, so that was, maybe a clue. It would only do it above a certain power level, but yeah, this to this day remains to be an issue that we have to troubleshoot. Part of it is working with the other station that's on this combiner as well, so that's posed a lot of challenges in terms of troubleshooting. But to their credit, the vendor of the combiner and the antenna, even though they were initially, pointing at the transmitter, to their credit, they really came out and have basically gone through that system at least as far as they can. They haven't gone, as far as, I don't think we've done the antenna and gone up the antenna and the line. The problem is we can't really reproduce it on demand in such a way that we can really tell exactly where this fault is happening, because externally everything looks great. I almost wish something would blow up, but
Well, and that's one of my troubleshooting techniques. If I've got a standalone station with an intermittent problem, you turn it up until it's a permanent problem, then it gets a whole lot easier to troubleshoot when the smoke
There's
starts
something
coming.
there's something to be said for that, Jeff. Honestly, it's it's a valid technique. It's a destructive technique, but it's a valid technique. You
Yeah,
know,
we'll call that the boom method of transmitter troubleshooting. So
yes.
bring
So,
on
but
other
yeah, we're
maintenance
still
now.
we finally. I mean, we're on an aux. I mean, we're still basically trying to track down that particular issue. It's
Yeah.
been extremely elusive. So, but it wasn't the transmitter. You just have to keep following the process. And now it's looking like it's got to be up on the tower somewhere. So,
Hmm.
the question is where.
Well, and I
TDR
say,
looks great. Everything looks great. It's
yeah.
just when this arcs at above a certain power level. I mean, I suppose if there's a way to do a TDR sweep at 10 kilowatts repeatedly, maybe that might make some people unhappy.
It's
But
the big challenge too. When you get to stuff like this, especially with arcing, you're looking at a power or voltage related event. I mean, E equals I times R, so the two are related. But
yep.
a TDR is not a high voltage device by any stretch.
Yeah,
Neither
even
is
if you amplify that signal. Yeah.
right. And I mean, even an operating bridge will only go up to 2 to 5 kilowatts depending on your model. So, if you're looking at a 30 kilowatt system with a voltage or power related arc, that's
Well,
that's got to be a challenge.
yeah, 60 kilowatts if you count both stations into that
Right.
antenna system.
And I
So,
mean, at that now, the combiner made more sense to me because the combine, of course, then again, you've got phase shift through the combiner too that will be different for the two stations. So depending on where an arc is in phase relationship, one transmitter may not see it at all.
right.
So just to add to the mystery. Now, here's a question though. Could you throw 90 degrees of line at the output of the combiner, which electrically speaking shouldn't interfere with either station, and then see if the problem moves to the other transmitter? I
That's an
bet there would
interesting
be,
thought. Yeah,
I
that's an
mean,
interesting thought. I did think about line length being a potential issue in that one. And, anything is worth a try at this point,
yeah.
so,
So anyway, I
but
mean,
yeah,
that's just like I say, there is a
because,
process that you have to follow, but it's really situational.
yeah, I mean, sometimes it could go days or weeks without showing this fault. And that's the trouble. That's the troublesome part. That's what makes it so difficult to pin down to an exact point. So
Right.
anyway,
And I mean, now these aren't either his sites, but I'm unmuting Dan again just because I know he's got that awesome studio and he really wants to use it. So I'm going to have to bring him back for a video conference pretty soon. But one of the things, and I know Dan's taken over a few new sites, and you watch, he's not paying attention now. He's sitting there going, "Oh no, how he's unmuted." But when you take over a new site, one of the first things you almost have to do is a walkthrough to see what you're getting yourself into. What the heck were they thinking? And Dan, I know you've done this quite a bit before. Matter of fact, these aren't your pictures, but they're not too far from your neighborhood.
Uh, yeah, I don't recognize those, but
I
they
know.
do have a bit of familiarity to them in theme. Because some of them you don't do walkthroughs. The first thing you do is you call, can you get somebody out here with a bush hog? Because I can't even get to just to look at it.
Oh, I should have put those pictures in. I've got those pictures too. We had actually, there's a site a couple hours north of you, Dan, where engineer called and he goes, heading out the transmitter, just want to let you know, see if you're going to be around. No call, no call, no call, no call. Finally, reach out to him a couple of days later, said, "Hey, thought you were going to call me. Did you get it solved?" Just trying to close the service ticket. And he goes, "Well," he goes, "I got to the building and there was a 4-inch tree growing in front of the door, so I couldn't open it." Now, even a poplar takes a little while to get to 4 inches in diameter. And allowing for the exaggeration that we all tend to do when we're talking about how big something is, that's still that's a pretty hefty. So how long's it been since the last transmitter site visit? So Dan, question for you, because I know you run contract services. Do you tend to run like retainers where you do intervaled inspections? How do you work that stuff?
Um, in a lot of them, it depends on the age of the equipment, condition of the site. There's sites that I could go to probably justify going to every week because there's going to be a problem. There's going to be weeds. There's going to be, something's happening. And then there's some sites that you're lucky that between the remote telemetry and, the station owners, general maintenance of the site, and they got contracted folks to come out and cut the grass. And, I've got the GM and one of his guys, every summer they go out and they spray a combination of glyphosate and soil sterilizer, and then they turn around and clean up. And so you don't have the big weed problems. Some of those sites I'm comfortable not going to about every 3 months and looking online, seeing everything's, it's running smooth.
Yeah,
And sometimes it feels like you can't get there for, maybe 3 months because you're so busy putting fires out at those other sites.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
That's
kind of
definitely.
situational.
Yeah, it's definitely going
That's
to be a site-by-site consideration. I mean, we've got something like 800 sites, and between contract engineers and field engineers, I mean, most of them we try to get them visited at least at least once a month for just a quick look and inspection, see if there's anything really obvious and nasty going on there, and once a year for more detailed inspections. Every single one should be getting a detailed inspection at least once a year. But some of them, I mean, you can't access them for like 6 to 9 months out of the year because of this thing called winter and snow. So,
right.
so yeah,
Well,
it's
and
definitely a situational thing.
yeah, and of course in the summer, I definitely like to get to every site if possible every month because you're going to have a worse problem with cottonwood and dust and pollen. Filters going to be stopped up. Wintertime, some of these sites, the air conditioner hardly ever runs. As a matter of fact, the one that we just installed, the NV 10LT, and fired up on the 6th, I was just talking to the GM yesterday, and he's got temperature probes on the air return, on the air ducts, and we're already excited to see the next electrical bill because given a day almost exactly a year ago when the outside weather conditions, temperature, everything was the same, we had put a new tube in that old tube transmitter. Right now, the air that's coming back into the return is 22 degrees cooler, running the same power transmitter, but going to the solid state NV10LT. And between the air conditioning system and that transmitter, I told him I'm not going to be surprised we see at least a 30% reduction in the power costs.
It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, depending on what
Okay.
you're running to, I mean, different transmitters, especially now solid states, we're all running 70 to 75% AC to RF efficiency now. So
Yep.
that's not going to change a whole lot from one brand to the other. But when you look at the tube rigs, I mean, a grounded grid versus a
Yeah.
tetrode, yeah, it's a significant difference. I mean, there are tube transmitters that are pushing solid state levels like near 70% overall efficiency. Grounded grid ones, 50%, 55% on a good day downhill with a tailwind, 45 on the average with less than optimal tubes.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
that's
you're right. That's a big deal.
managers out there running those old CCAs and CSIs and AELs and whatever. Uh, all of those grounded grid boxes. I mean, they might be surprised to learn that that's actually costing them more money operationally than they think.
Oh yes, and this of course this NV10LT replaced an old. If anybody can remember these, the old 10K FM gates. That thing, or Harris, excuse me, it was Harris. It was the old name. Well, we should probably just go by their initials, HARRIS. That thing, we were looking, and of course, going back to the discussion of the air conditioning, um, it didn't cycle last year. It came on and it stayed on. Now we're seeing it cycle like 3 times an hour, and that's already telling us that NV10 is nowhere near the waste heat, running
Yep.
Right.
exactly the same TPO.
Yeah,
And so I'm
that's going
not
to help.
quite as concerned about that site now as far as having to go and replace the air conditioner filters quite as often because it's not sucking in as much air.
Yeah, that's going to help the longevity of
yeah.
your transmitter. It's going to help the longevity of your HVAC. Yeah, so it's just a good move operationally all around.
Yeah.
Oh,
All right.
yeah.
Well, thanks,
Well,
Dan. I wanted to bring you back on to talk about that
thank
a
you,
little
Jeff.
bit. Appreciate it. So one other thing that we bring in, temperature was kind of a tangential reference as we were talking exhaust, but one of the other things that I don't see often enough. So Just got back from the broadcasters clinic. The Wisconsin broadcasters put on probably, arguably, one of the best engineering content shows in the country. I mean, Shane and I are not just saying that because we were actually speakers this year, but yeah, it's a great show. Shout out to Kyle, Michelle, Linda. They've got an entire committee tasked with making sure this goes well. And it's great. Before that, Columbus, those guys and Chris and the crew put together an amazing show there. So there's just a lot of good engineering content out there. But what I've started doing when I go to these shows, if I'm doing a presentation on maintenance or tips, I'll ask for a show of hands. How many people have a thermal camera of some sort, whether it's like the FLIR infrared attachment? It's like I should be on their payroll at this point, because these FLIR cameras, I carry mine. Well, there's the old one. I've got a new one in my laptop case upstairs, but worth their weight in gold. And if you don't have one of those, you can get even the cheap little point and shoot infrared laser aimed things like from Fluke, are $100, give or take. Shane, you got one?
Actually, I do have one. It's a standalone kind of, gun style, but it's not the, I don't have one that attaches to my phone, but yeah, it's a valuable addition to your toolbox, and it's a cheap insurance policy.
Yeah. And a FLIR one these days, the bottom line FLIR one shipped and taxes in $250. So, it's not like nickels and dimes, but relatively speaking, not a terrible price.
It's a lot cheaper than replacing a burned up electrical panel, or worse yet, having to rebuild an entire site.
I'm going to say it's a lot cheaper than your deductible for the fire. No question about that. And I have run into that before, where I've walked into one. My record so far, now I'm going to quantify this, and I want to say a couple of months ago, but in my mind it could have been 2 years. So I had Gary Cavell on, and we were talking about thermography not too terribly long ago, and Gary made the point that it's a lot easier to get a wrong answer with a thermal camera than a right answer. So depending on the emissivity and reflectivity of what you're measuring, your number may not be accurate. Now, my go-to is typically black cloth hockey tape, because, well, I'm Canadian. It's $1 a roll, $1 a bundle. But it gives you a non-reflective surface, so at least that part you've got covered. But yeah, my record for a circuit breaker, 197 degrees Fahrenheit so far. That's toasty.
Well, even considering that, even if you don't have absolute values in temperature, and unless you take those things into account, take the absolute values with a grain of salt, but you still get a nice relative value by looking at, well, Jeff, you got a great example there on the left, that photo of the breaker panel. You can see that there is a hot spot, and there's something you can check into.
Yeah, and you can see that you've got several breakers closed that are not showing any significant heat, and then that guy in the top right's like, I'm a little toasty. And it's toasty on the load side, not the bus side. So, which is coincidentally where the compression connection is, the screw terminal onto the wire going into it.
Yep.
So,
which also need to be.
Brad's got to bail on us, but we'll say see you, Brad.
Bye, Brad.
So yeah, it's worth its weight in gold, and it's become one of those things where I've gotten into the habit, whenever I've got it with me, if I walk into a transmitter site, the first thing I do when I step in the door is to plug the thing into the phone and take the picture of the electrical panels. And again, you're looking, especially if it's a site you maintain on a regular basis, then you go in once, you get a benchmark, and from then on, you're just looking for the exact same colors. It doesn't have to be an absolute reading of what's the temperature, but wow, this one's a lot hotter than it was last time I was here.
Yeah. And quick shout out here to Paul Schulin. I don't, he's not on this call, but he gives an excellent presentation on this subject as well, getting into great detail about thermographic photography and all of that fun stuff, and emissivity and reflectivity and how it all impacts. And if you ever get a chance, he was at, I think he was at the Ohio one that we did. I think he was at
He
one of
was.
these clinics recently. He did a great job, a great presentation on that. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, Paul's an excellent resource. By the same token, again, Cavell and Mertz have done a lot of stuff on this. They've just moved and renamed, but they're still the same people, so that's awesome. I'm going to set Ed on a task. So, by the way, I didn't give my obligatory shout out at the beginning to Mr. Disembodied Voice, Ed Sylvester, who makes all the shiny stuff happen in the background. So, Ed, thanks for everything you do. Now he's panicking.
My pleasure.
There he is. But now, so homework for Ed. If you can go into our archives and find that one with Gary Cavell and just post the link from the Nautel website to that webinar, that'd be really cool. Throw it up in chat. I will give the mandatory too. We're 5 minutes to the top of the hour. We're getting close to the end of the slide deck, but it's Shane and I talking, so we may go a little long. And I'll apologize in advance, but it's rare for us not to. So we will absolutely be, we'll be recording this. If you've got a hard cutoff at the top of the hour, totally understand, won't hurt my feelings. Let's see. John Hartmeyer mentions that the IR camera can also be useful on a drone looking for tower issues. And again, that webinar that we did with Mr. Cavell on thermography, we did cover that as well, because you are correct. I mean, hotspots in a line, hotspots on an antenna, interbay connectors, all kinds of things that can go sideways that having a drone. But again, same caveat, the emissivity, hey, I got it right that time, and reflectivity of what you're measuring. And it's not like you're going to be sticking hockey tape on an antenna bay, 500 feet above ground.
yeah,
And
so best time to do those examinations and those runs is probably before the daylight really starts to hit the tower and heat things up quite a bit, because otherwise you're going to be getting some kind of misleading values there.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, look, Nautel beat Ed to it with the link to the TTT. Or sorry, William beat Ed to it for the link from the website. I don't know. Might have been a tie. No. Timestamp says William got it a minute before Ed did. However, there's the link to Gary Cavell's thermography webinar. Ben Labanon has mentioned the. Let me get here. Talking about, and it's a good point. They're running a 40 kilowatt with a 400 meter 5-wire open wire transmission line with 300 ohm characteristic impedance, and converting an L network to adjust to 50 ohms. And on AM, this is something that you do have to do on a fairly regular basis. Well, I mean, these days not as much, but there's still a fair bit of open line in use out there, and some of it in North America. So that is something worth mentioning, though, when you are dealing, and you'll see the same thing, radio versus TV, or even different brands of coax. You can have different characteristic impedances. Shane's nodding his head, but I'm waiting for the words.
Did you ever run into 52 ohm coax, Jeff?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's 52 ohm, there's 50 ohm, there's 60 ohm, there's 75 ohm, and that's just what I see in coax.
And some of it'll depend on what frequency you're on as well. I mean, there's some of these oddball FMs that wind up with 52 ohm coax because that's just, the way their frequency and the length of the line land. So.
Right. I got into a lot of trouble with engineering once because I made the comment, well, if your source impedance is 50 ohms and your load impedance is 50 ohms and they're both exactly where they should be, then the characteristic impedance of your cable is irrelevant. Now wrap your head around that for a little while. Shane's going to be grabbing a calculator soon. Now I've got something for you to do in the hotel room tonight.
I've had that exact argument with people at one point, and you see this a lot, especially where you're dealing with 50 ohm systems versus 75 ohm systems. What's the difference? Does it really make any difference if I use 50 ohm or 75 ohm coax? Well, the answer is maybe.
So the answer is the second that either your source or your load slides off of the 50 ohms, so they're not identical, it absolutely makes a difference.
Right.
And that's the caveat, and that's why in a 50 ohm system you really should be using 50 ohm line all the way through. And in Ben's case here, with Engineer Levitin, of course they're running a 300 ohm line with a 300 ohm termination and a 50 ohm source, so you need to do an impedance transform. And I've seen similar things in FM, like 90-degree transformations to match stuff up. So yeah, again, I guess the ultimate goal to this comes back to very first slide where we were talking about documentation. You need to know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
So now here's a dumb question, totally on that topic and non-related. How do you guys do your documentation, Shane? Because I know you do probably more of it than the average bear.
Yeah, so a lot of it is electronic. We have an internal system that we use for, inventorying all the equipment at sites. We have a database that we take a bunch of photos and put them in. We have another system that we use for tracking maintenance at sites and work orders and things like that. I mean, whatever you choose to use, I mean, you want some kind of system for tracking this, even if it's just a simple spreadsheet. Here's the point where somebody tells me spreadsheets are not databases. Well, it's certainly a valid way to do it. If that's how you track your maintenance, great.
Yeah.
So
just track it somehow, even if it's a paper log.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I'm that guy. Like I say, I beat the drum with my rocket books. I love my rocket book.
Those are great.
I've sat more than a few coffees on this one.
For those that don't know, you can basically snap pictures of those, and it'll digitize it for you, whatever you put in that notebook.
Right, and I mean the advantage with it will do. So I save mine to Evernote, the Evernote app in my iPhone now, not my Samsung. That's a whole different story.
Let's not go there.
I had to get an iPhone plug-in at least once, but I'll snap it into the Evernote app, because the Evernote app, over and above that, I can take the hand scrawled notes, and I tend to print because I can't read my own writing, so that lets you know how neat I am. But the OCR in Evernote, when I scan the page into Evernote, I can actually search for call signs or keywords and look through my notes. I mean, can you imagine being able, I mean, going back, we've got guys in our engineering department, been there 30, 40 years, who have walls of the little 8x11 notebooks, the hardcover notepads, and like just date indexed, which is great. So this is my notepad from January to March of 1990, but what was in it?
So here's one little documentation tip for you when it comes to stations, especially multiple stations. Any of you who have been in this business for any length of time know that call signs change more often than some people change their underwear, right? So if you got a bunch of if you got call signs written in your documentation, at least when it comes to specifically related to the site and the transmitter plant, you might consider, instead of using the call letters, using the FIN, or maybe pairing the FIN with the call letters, because that FIN, the facility ID number, does not change. The FCC, the FIN number stays with that signal in that station, regardless of what the call letters change to, regardless even of what the frequency changes to. The FIN stays the same.
Now, what if they do a minor mod and move the site?
Same thing. The FIN will stay the same.
And that was my question there. So that's a good point. I mean, for the U.S. market, especially.
That's basically kind of the index key in the FCC's database for stations, so to speak.
So that's a good thing to know. And I mean, the other option may be, I guess, a geographic coordinate wouldn't work in the event of a site move, like I just said. So yeah, it is good to have some reference that stays the same. I mean, I can tell you right off that the local AM that I listened to for years when I first moved back here from Ontario, it went through, went from 680, transmitter came from 860, they moved to that site, then went to 780, and now it's FM. So same station, same people, but everything's changed. So
I mean, there may there may be a case where the fin changes, but so far I haven't run into that. I can't think of any case where the fin number would change between stations. At least, and again, this is just for the U.S. FCCs. I know we probably have some international viewers as well, but in the U.S., with the FCC, the fin number always stays with that particular facility.
Right. And I mean, if you are international or outside of the U.S., then there's certainly going to be some reference
There's
point.
probably an equivalent with whoever your communications authority is. Yeah.
Right. So the last picture was on temperature of the circuit breaker, so it made a good segue into generators. And if you get a site, and here's a cool question I had never heard or considered before. And I don't know enough about them to know the answer. Well, I do know now, but so we got talking about generators on one of the Facebook engineering groups, and somebody asked the question, does a propane generator need an oil change? And I thought about it, and it's like, well, I assume there's moving parts, so I assume they have to be lubricated, but I really didn't know. Turns out, yes, they do, and yes, there are. So there.
Yeah, the wear and tear in terms of in terms of carbon and so on will be different with a propane generator, but yeah, you still need to change the oil in propane generators.
Right.
So.
And I mean, it's, by the same token, if you are in a single phase site with a 3-phase transmitter and you've got a phase converter, then, you may discover after the fact, say several weeks or months after the fact, that the older phase converters have brushes. The mechanical ones have brushes that need to be maintained or replaced.
William Harrison says, generators need oil?
So, cool little side note. We had a little bit of a storm here at Casa de Welton not too terribly long ago. And since the power company was privatized and has to please shareholders, certain things have, I won't say fallen by the wayside. I mean, obviously, maintenance is one of those required things, but the level of it may have changed just a little bit than when they were spending taxpayer money hand over fist. And so I'm sure Bill's going to be in the background nodding his head and going, oh, yeah. But our power was out during that storm for 4 days. I've got a 9-kilowatt generator out behind the house, and it's gas powered. It cost me about $30 a day to run the thing, but it beats the heck out of being in the dark or without internet when you got a teenager in the house, or me, because I live on the internet. But anyway, so after day 2 or 3, I shut the thing down overnight. So I went out in the morning, filled up the gas tank, as is my ritual, opened the choke, hit the start button. It started, it took off, closed the choke, it stopped. So I tried again, maybe about 10 or 20 times, because, maybe it'll work this time. Anyway, turns out.
Insanity again?
Yeah. Repeating the experiment, expecting different results. Turns out my generator has an oil temperature sensor. Well, when there's very little or almost no oil in it, it doesn't take too long for those few drops of oil to reach shutdown temperature, and that's what was happening. So yeah, sure enough, I checked the dips. So after trying 10 or 20 times to get it to start with no success, I did what everybody does and went to Google, and turns out I got an entire page full of hits, and 100% of them said it's the oil level, dummy. So, I can take a hint. I checked the dipstick, and sure enough, the oil level was very, very low. And half a pint of oil later, and we're back in business. So yeah, absolutely, generators need oil.
And some generators I know used to have, even the smaller ones used to have indicators on them for oil temp or oil level. But yeah, a lot of them may have the sensors, but don't have any kind of indication to tell you that that's what's going on. So
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and mine may have thrown an error code, but since the display's been burned out for about 2 years now. What do they say? The plumber's pipes get fixed last, right?
But it's not connected by a Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or.
No, not that advanced. And the squirrels ate half the wiring in it, and a couple of the airlines have been replaced with airlines round so heavily with duct tape that they're pretty much totally duct tape now. So, hey, it's a 10-year-old generator. It's due to be replaced. It's on the list of $10,000 projects.
There you go.
Now, let's see. Dan mentions I have 2 propane fired generators right here at home, and they require full service, oil filter plugs, etc. And that's when William comes in and says, always have a spare filter and enough oil for at least 1 change on hand. And that is a really good point. And I mean, in my case, once Google said it, check the oil level, dummy, I went to the maintenance box, I call it. I've got a milk crate in the carport that has maintenance items for the chainsaws, the lawnmowers, the generator, including oil for each one, and filters and plugs and all that stuff. So, yep, I may be lax in doing the maintenance, but I've got the parts. So that was beneficial. All right. On that note, we're 10 after the top of the hour. Shane, closing thoughts or comments? What's your highlight of the day? What's your good thing to remember?
Visit those sites regularly, as often as you possibly can, because even in a short interval between site visits, things happen. So visit your sites.
Well, and the other thing is, as you learn the sites, because I mean, if you're inheriting a new one, of course, you don't know what that interval needs to be. So set it short
Right.
to start with and then figure it out. But understand that between, as Dan said earlier, when you're talking cottonwood season in a good chunk of the Midwest, south to north, then, those site visits may be measured in days, not weeks or months. And then when you get into the winter season, they could be measured in months.
Well, one more thing I'll put in a plug for is looking at maybe getting maintenance contracts for your generator and your HVAC systems. I mean, those are 2 of your most critical systems to keep you on the air. So, if you have somebody who's regularly checking them, even if you can't get out to that site, if you have somebody who's regularly checking in on those systems, making sure that they're up to snuff, then at least you can have some assurance that they'll be ready and ready when you need them. So.
Yeah, and I mean that's why like the 10-year-old generator out behind Casa de Welton is getting nursed along or limping along until probably about 2 years from now. The project goal is a whole house 20 kilowatt generator with transfer switch, which will plumb into the 2,000-pound propane tanks behind the house. And at that point, I can be on the road and real boss won't have to worry about if the lights go off, because right now you lift the lid on the generator lean to, there may or may not be spiders under there, and she has issues with that. So the good thing is in our part of the world, spiders typically are non-venomous. Dan wants to know if we can open his mic for a quick generator comment, and I think that we'll give Dan a closing remark too, just because he's been the unofficial, totally unnotified co-star of the show. So Dan, poor Dan, like I said, I called him 15 minutes before this started and said, hey, can I borrow your pictures? And he goes, yeah, our power came back on. So you were running on generator like today, weren't you, Dan?
Yep, for the second time in 2 days. Hopefully they were fixing whatever got broken yesterday. You've mentioned this before in many of your discussions about generators, but I'm going to tell you from experience. I have one client that has a site where probably a total of between the television, full power FMs, translators, and all, there's probably about 15 stations operating at that site. Very nice generator. They had a good service contract with the company who comes out like, every 3 months, whatever, checks oil, everything in the generator, fires it. The generator automatically fires and runs every week. The only thing was, it wasn't running under load.
Yeah.
And when I talked to the GM and we decided to have the guys start coming out and running it under load, guess what? We had a 25 kilowatt transmitter that when that generator started up, you could see meters bouncing, alarm lights going off, stations off the air. And come to find out, what was happening was when the generator would kick on, the voltage it was putting out was about 10 degrees higher than utility voltage, and a particularly fussy power supply on an HT25 did not like that.
Yep.
And then they did some adjusting on that, and recently we found out that now that transmitter runs great on it, but the HT35 is not agreeing with it. So we're like, okay, figure out what's going on here, because everything should be able to run, but you got to run them under load.
That's a great
you
point.
can say, oh, it cranks, it starts, it does great, but till it's under load, you're risking finding out the really painful way in an extended power outage that things aren't
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, not
So
all gear likes to run on all generators or all UPSs, and these are the kind of things that you have to test to find out.
yeah, and
Yep.
over and
If
above
it's
that, I'm going to throw two notes on this. Number one note, make sure that when you're doing your load test, at least once a year, you test your transfer switch as well. So, because a lot of folks will come in and put a load bank on the generator to run it hard at load, which is fine. But if you're not basically pulling the service to the building and checking the transfer switch and all of the functions, you don't know that your system works. Item number two, and it's related to a comment William put, running under load also quickly tells you if you've got a 50 kilowatt load on a 25 kilowatt generator. And he's not wrong, but the other thing is that generators, when they come up, some transmitters come up very quickly. And if they come up very quickly, they can sag the generator load down below the shutdown voltage of the transmitter, depending on the transmitter.
Right.
So like one of the things in ours, for example, they have what I call generator mode, where you can adjust both the turn on delay, how long it waits before it tries to come up, and the ramp speed, how long it takes it to come from 0 to set power. So, if you set it for a 50% ramp and a 30-second delay, then the generator's got time to come up, stabilize, and the transmitter comes up slowly so it doesn't hit it with the load all at once.
Right.
Dan, I'm going to throw this right back to you. So you're going to have to unmute yourself for this, but you play with generators more than I do. How often should you test your generator under load? This question Brian had asked.
I'm not going to be able to
Dan.
give you a definitive answer on that. I can tell you that around here, being in East Central Alabama and West Central Georgia, they get tested under load during thunderstorm season more often than you care for. But as far as voluntarily going in and putting it under load, we're actually trying to do that no less often than about every 3 months now, and not wait every year, because the last two power failures we've had, we found out that in one case, one transmitter didn't like it. In another outage, another transmitter didn't like it. And so when the guys work on it and they say everything should be good, well, we want to know today, we want to know next month and whatever, that it's going to work. It's going to work. So I can't tell you, how often should you do it? It's kind of like the situation we were talking about earlier. Some of it depends on how new is your generator, how good your equipment, how reliable has it been operating. Have you changed anything, added loads? There's a lot of factors in that.
Right. Now, Marco's mentioned that he tests his generator by transferring to the main building once a month and runs it for about half an hour. And that ties in for me. I mean, I do a start test on the house generator. There was a stretch where I wasn't doing it near often enough, and we discovered that the day that I was a long way away from here and the power went out, and Real Boss did brave the spiders, went out, pulled the choke, pressed the little red button, and absolutely nothing happened because the battery was dead, because it had been that long since I tested the generator. So now I do a run test. I just schedule it to payday because it's a convenient time, but do a run test every couple of weeks and then do a load test every couple of months. And the good thing for me is it's a manual transfer panel, so there's less to worry about with that. But I want to be sure that when I bring the generator on, because running it just tells me the motor's running. It doesn't tell me the alternator's making current.
Absolutely. Yeah, at a previous employer, I actually, we had kind of an old and cranky generator. So we decided to start doing these kind of full building load tests on a pretty regular basis. And it was amazing. Every time we would do that, all the stuff, all the critical stuff also had UPSs behind it. But we would find things like, okay, maybe the UPSs now don't like the generator for some reason. Okay, what can we do to adjust that or to deal with that? Maybe there was some new equipment installed that was not plugged into a UPS and generator backed circuit, but it's somewhere critical in the air chain. Ooh, that's a tough one to find. That one, but that happened more often than that I like to think about as well. So all very important stuff.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, it's not enough to test backups, as we were talking with the generators. You've got to test them under all other operating conditions. And I mean, if you've got, like for me, the whole network here at Casa de Welton is backed up with a big honking UPS, which reminds me I'm due to swap the batteries out on the UPS. But but the big honking UPS, I tested it both on mains and generator. Well, I mean, by mains, it's easy. You plug it into the wall, and if it doesn't say anything nasty, you're great. But you also got to see it running on the generator. Otherwise, you discover that it doesn't run on the generator. It just stays on battery until they go dead.
Right.
And
Yeah. And believe it or not, there are some generators that don't put out a nice clean sine wave, just like there are some UPS, a lot of UPSs actually, that don't put out a nice clean sine wave. A lot of them are kind of a modified square wave, and there's some gear you'll find that don't like that.
some stuff that puts out straight sawtooth. So yeah, good point there as well. All right. As I said earlier, this webinar, like all our webinars, will be archived on the website. I see Webb's got the, or Webb, sorry, Ed. Ed is Mr. Webb. That's going to be his new middle name, Edward Webb Sylvester. But anyway, he's got the link up for the thermal imaging in the chat, so y'all can get to that. Certainly, you'll be able to find this one by going to the link on the page and searching for it later. Waves newsletter had one come out a month or two ago. Vaguely, time is again fluid as you get older. YouTube channel, online info, Barry Michigan's BDR, the various Facebook groups. Depending on the levels of info versus opinion you want to achieve, you can find just about everything in some online forum or another. Then by all means, certainly reach out, call your manufacturer reps, whoever they may be, or reach out, find somebody like Shane. You know, again, life's all about finding people smarter than you and listening to what they got to say. All right, let's see, one quick last minute tip from Ben Labanon. I remember a certain tip: installing a power generator transmitter site, make sure the phases of the generator and the power lines are the same. And with the phase rotation, that is a very good deal. There is some gear that takes that personally.
Oh, anything with a 3-phase motor in it, yeah, we'll certainly not like it if it's wrong.
Yeah. So no, and I mean that means typically like air conditioners, pumps, anything like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good point. So yeah, if you're wiring backup power, make sure that you got the phase orientation matched. All right. On that note, we ran 22 minutes past the top of the hour. It is 2:22 p.m. here on the eastern coast of the great country of Canada, where winter is coming, but not for a while, we hope. So, oh yes, and test your generator starting battery as well. That comes back to what I said. If you press the button and nothing happens, that's typically not a good day. So on that note, Shane, I really want to thank you for your time. I know you've got more than enough to do, and there are a bunch of guys in the building looking at their watches going, is he ever going to come in and do some real work? So
absolutely, anytime, Jeff. I really appreciate the opportunity to be a guest here.
Sitting in a truck at the top of a mountain in an undisclosed location on the East Coast. Shane Toven from EMF. Really appreciate you.
Thanks,
folks. Jeff. I really appreciate y'all for hanging with us. I see that a good chunk, over 2/3, stayed with us right till the bitter end, and I can't tell you how much that means. Yeah, we will get the mandatory post-show survey. Make it a point to fill that out, and all the way to the right, I think it is, I don't know, at some point in the survey, there's a question that says, what else could we talk about? Those are the kind of things, and I mean, this session and the next one in a couple of weeks came specifically from one of those surveys where somebody said, you blather on about this, that, and the other thing. How about talking a little more about transmitters? So, you know, about transmitter sites. So absolutely fill out the survey. Let us know what we can do to improve. On that note, I want to thank you very, very much. Y'all have a wonderful couple of weeks, and we'll see you again on October 31st. Thank you. Bye now.